There's a reason the phrase safe space makes so many men today tense up. It's not because men don't want to be safe, but more so because we were never really taught what safety actually means. I think somewhere along the way, the culture we're in twisted this idea, and safety in the process got tangled with softness, and softness got mistaken for surrender. And surrender, I think to most men, just men who are basically raised on survival, it felt like losing their power. And so when we talk about being a safe space for women, many men, I think, instinctively just assume it means shrinking or silencing themselves or apologizing for their masculinity, or even showing up as this watered down version of who they are just so that they could avoid conflict. But that's not what safety is, I think. I think that describes more so like self-erasure. And a man who erases himself is not safe. He's actually unpredictable. He's unclear, he's unanchored, he's untrustworthy. Because a man who hides himself really cannot hold anything. Here at Uber Bintegers, I believe that the opposite of insecurity is not aggression, it's actually alignment. And the opposite of chaos isn't control, it's congruence. Integrity is what gives your strength structure, if you will, and intimacy is what gives your strength softness. And when both of these are present, people don't just hear you, they also trust you as well too. And that's what emotional safety, I think, actually is. It's not silence, but it's more so, well, it's not even performance or even compliance, but what we've been talking about all this time, and that is presence. Presence that doesn't really collapse, presence that doesn't cling, presence that doesn't try to control. It's a presence that actually holds space without losing itself in the process. And so this, I would say, this is the kind of masculine presence that heals instead of harms. And maybe I should deal with some misconceptions here. Like the first misconception is that safety means that I have to become smaller, right? I mean, let's clear this one immediately. Being a safe space for women does not mean that we're shrinking our voice or diluting our boundaries or even dimming our strength. That's not safety. That's like strategizing. That's a man who's really trying to avoid rejection. That's a man who's performing niceness instead of actually embodying integrity. But here's the truth, I think, that's worth considering. Women don't feel safe around men who shrink themselves. I mean, shrinking looks a lot like insecurity, and insecurity always becomes unpredictable, right? Safety is not small. Safety is steady, right? Being a safe space means you're bringing your full weight of who you are. And the thing is, you bring that fullness in this grounded and self-regulated way that's emotionally present, right? That's, I think, what leadership is. That's what maturity is. That's what I would say masculinity in motion looks like. Now, being a safe space is not also about just agreeing. It's more so about anchoring yourself. I think a lot of men try to be safe by never disagreeing, right? They nod, they over listen, they over accommodate, they suppress their own perspectives. But that's not safety either. That's like appeasement, right? Appeasement is rooted in fear and not in intimacy. And fear cannot build trust, right? Women don't need men who just disappear. Women need men, I think, who can stay. Men who can actually hold tension without panicking, right? Men who can actually sit in the emotion without folding inwards. Men who can listen. Where are they? Where are the men who can listen without actually losing themselves, right? And this is why appeasement, I think, leads to a lot of resentment. And resentment just leads to emotional withdrawal. And an emotional withdrawal, it destroys relationships eventually, I'd say. Now, safety is not the absence of conflict. Safety is really the presence of clarity. And clarity only exists where authenticity exists, right? And a man who hides his truth isn't really able to hold anyone else's truth. See, being a safe space is is more about containment, not controlling. And I don't think women need men to fix them. Women don't need men to solve every emotion. Like women don't even need men to carry what isn't theirs in the first place. I think what women are really looking for is a witness, not someone who's trying to save them, right? Because witnessing requires, again, that word presence, right? Saving is where your ego comes in and you're like, I'm gonna save this person, right? But a safe man is more so like a container, not a rescuer. A container who holds space without taking over that space. A rescuer who tries to control that space so he can feel useful or validated or important or indispensable. It's not so helpful. But safety is not about usefulness. Safety is more so about steadiness, right? Safety is what communicates the ability for one to exhale and say, I'm here. I'm not overwhelmed by your emotional reality. And that steadiness, I think, is really rare. Rare because most men, we're taught that emotions are like emergencies, right? Rare because most men believe that a woman's tears when they cry mean that they've failed themselves, right? Rare because men who were trained to fix didn't really ever learn how to feel. But tension is not danger. Tears are not collapse. Silence is not failure, I would say. A safe man actually knows this. And because he knows this, he's the kind of man who can become a refuge and not a reaction, right? I've got this course on my website. The title of it is called In the Ashes of the Alpha Male. And in this course, this is where I want to sort of broach this topic here, where a lot of us men have received this programming of trying to be saving, right? Saving others. And what we don't teach in this course is how to be performatively nice. We want to teach what embodied safety looks like. We want to teach men how to stop performing being calm and actually experience what being calm looks like. How to create emotional safety without collapsing their own boundaries, right? How to hold space without absorbing the storm of someone else. And especially how to be present without losing their own identity. See, everything inside this course here, you'll be able to find on uberbintegers.com. So go check that out there, because I would say safety requires structure, and structure becomes really one's strength, right? But here's what the anatomy of a safe man can look like. A safe man does, I would say, three things quite differently. Firstly, a safe man regulates before he reacts. He doesn't punish, he doesn't project, or he doesn't even panic. He remembers to breathe. And he grounds himself, he responds with intention. And then secondly, I would say a safe man owns his own emotional reality, right? He doesn't deflect, he doesn't deny, he actually names what's true without actually weaponizing that. And thirdly, I would say a safe man is able to hold his boundaries with clarity and with kindness. Not with walls or boundaries, not with distance, but more so direction, right? And I would say women feel safe around such a man who knows where he ends and where he also begins. Because a man without boundaries really becomes a man without an identity. And a man without an identity, that's a man who becomes one who cannot really be trusted, right? Now, being a safe space starts first with self-safety first. You cannot offer what you are terrified to receive yourself. Does that make sense? Because most men don't even know how to be a safe space for women, because first of all, they've never actually been a safe space for themselves. There's a necessary prior here. So in essence, they rush their own feelings, they shame their own tendencies, they deny their own needs, they belittle their own pain inside, and they often outrun their own emotions. And then it's at this point that they wonder why they crumble when someone else brings emotional depth into that space. No, I would say self-erasure does not create safety. It actually creates a lot of instability, right? Now, self-neglect does not create or facilitate presence. It just creates more panic. And you cannot hold someone's truth if you are drowning in your own. See, being a safe man begins first with becoming a safe home for your own humanity. That's where it starts. And if you cannot sit with your own sadness, you're gonna panic amidst hers. If you cannot regulate your own anger, you're gonna weaponize hers, right? If you cannot validate your own inner world, you will in essence invalidate hers as well. I'd say self-safety precedes relational safety. Now, this is where I would say many men lose themselves. See, they confuse empathy with enmeshment, right? They confuse support with self-abandonment. They confuse listening with losing. And furthermore, they also confuse connection, like true connection, with compliance. But empathy without boundaries really becomes self-erasing. And self-erasure, it always kind of mutates eventually into resentment. And women really do not want a man who disappears. I would say women want a man who's able to stay present and who's able to stay whole. Because presence, again, without identity is not presence, it's more so performance. Now, the most attractive safety, I would argue, is authenticity, right? A safe man is not neutral. I mean, he has his own opinions, he has his own standards, he has his own spine, his own backbone. But this man, he lives all of this with clarity, not control. He's committed to honesty and not harshness. He has a steadiness about him, and he doesn't try to act superior to others. Safety, I would say, is really the combination of both emotional fluency and emotional boundaries, and even like emotional integrity as well. That, like, all of these wrapped together, such a powerful combination. And that's what makes a man who's grounded instead of one who's suffocating. A safe man is not the man who never falters. He's the man who actually never fakes it, right? Because safety is not perfection. Safety is predictability. Not predictability in behavior as much as in predictability of character. That's the critical part, because women feel safe with men who are internally consistent. Men whose actions match their words, right? Men whose energy will also match their intention. Men whose boundaries that they draw actually match the values that they espouse and advocate for. Now, safety is really the byproduct of a man who lives in alignment, not of a man who performs alignment, right? A man who embodies that alignment. That's the man who's actually safe. So here's, I would say, why safety feels far more like strength and not softness, the way most people would perceive. See, there is a myth, I think, that's circulating today that being safe means you're soft, right? That if you build emotional safety, your masculinity becomes muted, right? But here's the truth. I would say safety amplifies your masculinity. It doesn't diminish or shrink it, because safety is leadership. Safety is clarity. Safety is emotional intelligence in action. Safety is presence with purpose. I would say safety further is even strength that's expressed through steadiness rather than aggression. And what makes a man feel safe is not the absence of power, it's really the mastery of that power. A man who cannot control his intensity, that's a dangerous man right there. But a man who avoids intensity altogether is also unreliable, I would say. Listen, a man who can actually regulate his intensity, that's a trustworthy man there. That's the masculine sweet spot, I would say. That's power that is under discipline. Not power under suppression, and not power because of guilt, or even performance, but power under this emotional mastery. That regulation is such a critical point. So that's the kind of strength, I would argue, again, that makes women feel safe and not suffocated. Now listen though, I would say safety requires boundaries too, doesn't it? Not bending, but clearly drawn out boundaries. A lot of men think that being safe means always saying yes. Yes to every discomfort. Yes to every emotional request that's made to them. Yes to every need, even when it costs them their own center of who they truly are. But being boundaryless is not safety. That is instability. Boundaries are not barriers. Boundaries are, they're points of clarity, right? Boundaries are really what allow you to access intimacy and to let that intimacy deepen without drowning in it. Boundaries are what allow you to have compassion so that it can flow out without you collapsing within. Boundaries are what makes connection sustainable instead of just suffocating, right? A safe man knows his truth. And this truth is one of the ones that he knows. He can say things like, I can be present with you without having to abandon myself. See, he doesn't need to disappear to accommodate her emotions. He doesn't need to shrink to avoid conflict. He doesn't need to self-sacrifice just to keep the peace. Because a man who cannot hold his own boundaries, I would say this is a man who cannot hold a relationship as well. See, women feel far safer when a man knows where he stands, right? Because then they also know where they stand. Safety is really the art, I would argue, of regulated presence. Most of us men, we were raised on emotional urgency, right? Fix it right now, or stop crying, or make the problem just go away. Have you heard those? So when emotional tension arises, we tend to panic and we interpret that intensity as danger, right? And then we further interpret grief as a rejection and we interpret tears as if we've failed. But emotional intensity is not a test. Think of it like an invitation into depth with this person who's so important to you, an invitation into intimacy, an invitation, if you will, into a better understanding of who this person is. And a safe man does not try to stop emotional intensity. What he does is he slows himself down so that he can actually meet it. And his breath becomes his anchor point. His posture becomes the container, if you will, and his tone becomes that reassurance. And his presence that he brings, that becomes the stability of that connection. Because emotional safety, I would say, is created through a regulated nervous system and not an ego that is reactive. See, a safe man, he knows how to stay grounded long enough for clarity to come to the surface for her and for himself as well. See, safety requires knowing when you also have to step back, right? Because being a safe space doesn't mean that you're always a sponge, just taking whatever comes your way. See, you're not absorbing everything that she might be feeling. You're not carrying like everything that she carries herself. You're not really merging your emotional identity with hers. That's not what's happening here. That's what I would call enmeshment. And enmeshment always, I think, leads to more resentment, right? But a safe man understands that empathy has boundaries and that compassion has a capacity, right? It's not endless. And the structure has a support system as well. He knows when to say, I'm here with you, but I also need a moment just to ground myself as well. Not as avoidance, but as a withdrawal, right? More so like as a responsibility to himself first before he cares for another. Because you can't remain safe if you've depleted yourself. You can't offer clarity if, say, you're overwhelmed, right? You can't create calm for someone else if you've, in essence, lost your own center. See, safety requires sourcing yourself out first through rest, right? Through boundaries, through self-regulation. All this is really critical. And a man who, in essence, denies his need, I would say eventually becomes a man who resents hers as well. But listen, safety is built through honesty and not perfection. And a safe man does not pretend that he never gets triggered. He doesn't really pretend that he never gets overwhelmed. He further doesn't even pretend that he's above the emotional discomfort that he might be feeling. What he does is he tells the truth. He says things like, gosh, I'm just noticing that this is bringing up something for me. And I may need a second to settle myself, right? I may need a moment so that I want to support you, but I also need clarity on what you're asking from me, right? I want to stay present with you, but let me just take a quick breath first. Honesty is what makes that safety sustainable. Because a man who hides his internal reality eventually leaks it out, right? A man who suppresses his emotions, I think he eventually weaponizes them, right? A man who pretends to be unaffected, this is a man who eventually becomes unpredictable. See, safety demands transparency, not just raw dumping and not this chaotic oversharing, not even emotional instability, but transparency with self-discipline. That's intimacy and that's integrity. That's what I would say is emotional maturity. Safety, I think, is felt, not announced. You cannot just tell someone that you're a safe person, right? Because people just intuitively feel this. They feel it in your breath. They feel it in your tone. They feel it in your stillness. They feel it in your clarity. They can feel it even in your own consistency, right? And furthermore, they feel it because your presence reveals your inner world. Safety is not a performance. Safety is an embodiment, right? See, you are safe when your nervous system is not at war with itself. You are a safe person when your ego is not driving this interaction with this person that you care so deeply about. You are safe when your boundaries are firm and your heart is open. You're a safe person when your values and your actions are aligned. Safety is really the energy of a man who has nothing to prove and nothing to hide, right? That's the kind of man I think that women can actually trust. That's the kind of man that men can themselves trust. That's the kind of man that you can yourself finally trust yourself to be, right? Listen, again, in that course that I mentioned earlier, in the Ashes of the Alpha Male, you can find that on my website. I would say safety there is a skill, right? This course will teach men how to build this exact kind of grounded safety. Not by memorizing scripts, not by manipulating emotions, not even by like suppressing like their own intensity, right? But more so by becoming a man whose presence actually communicates a steadiness without even having to say the word, right? So you can find that on my course. And even further, I was just remembering some other things that I have in that course. There's lessons on how to self-regulate your emotional tension you have inside, how to hold space, for example, without absorbing someone else's pain, how to communicate boundaries with clarity, right? These are some really useful skills. How to stay present when your instincts just want to retreat and hide. How to further cultivate emotional reliability. Think about how to even move from performance to embodying, right? This is all within that course. And you can find that at uberbintegers.com. Go check it out there. It's one entire course to help reshape men from the inside out. Really important trajectory that way, right? Because safety is not a role that you play. It's the kind of man you become. But let me just talk a little bit about why safety makes masculinity magnetic. See, safe men are not nice. Safe men are not beta. They're not soft, right? What safe men is they are sovereign. They don't have to rush to prove anything. They don't panic under pressure. They don't weaponize emotions. They further don't even disappear in the midst of their own discomfort. What they do is they remain grounded. They don't destabilize even when that intensity arises. Their steadiness is what becomes the very atmosphere in the room that they're in, right? And when a woman feels safe, then she can be soft. When she can be soft, then she can actually be real and authentic. And when she can be real, intimacy becomes effortless. See, safety is really the soil where passion, trust, depth, and devotion can grow. And nothing is more attractive, I would say, than a man who can stay. But let me just bring this episode to a close. It's already long enough. Let me say, being a safe space for women does not require you to lose yourself. It requires you to actually know yourself so well that you don't disappear in someone else's emotions. It's not about perfection. It's more so about presence. It's not about rescuing someone else. It's more about how are you regulating yourself. It's not about compliance, it's about clarity. It's not like many think about softness, it's more so about steadiness. And a safe man is not a silent man. A safe man is a man who is grounded, a man who is present, a man who's congruent, a man who wants to redefine what masculinity could look like. And in a world where so many men are either aggressive or absent, the man who can be both strong and safe becomes sacred. Listen, in tomorrow's episode, I want to restore the lost art of reverence, how devotion and presence and emotional mastery can transform masculinity into something sacred again. So that's in tomorrow's episode. I think it's episode 25, the return of the gentleman, strength with soft hands. I hope I'll see you there. But for the time being, do drop me a comment down below. Let me know how this episode landed for you. I would love to interact with you and see what kind of epiphanies and ideas came along. I will see you in tomorrow's episode. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.